LL221 Tel Aviv Tower, you are clear for takeoff on runway 21.
Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2020, 19th of Sivan 5780, and this is Canadian Jewish Views.
LL221 Toronto Tower, you are clear to land on runway 33 right. Welcome to Canada. Welcome home.
I'm your host, Martin Sampson. Welcome to Canadian Jewish Views. This is a product of CIJA. We're the advocacy agent of Jewish federations across Canada, and this show is about shining a light on the vibrant Jewish community across this great land. By the end of today's show, you'll be a little more connected to your shared Jewish life. You'll hear thoughtful views from fellow Canadian Jews and other leaders in civil society. We'll also throw in an advocacy update and tell you about an opportunity to take action. And finally, you'll be asked to ponder big ideas from Canadian rabbis, words as exceptional in their wisdom as they are in their brevity. You know rabbis. That joke was brought to you by Rabbi Bulka in Ottawa. On today's show, Reverend Anthony Bailey, pastor at Ottawa's Parkdale United Church, part of our listening series, with a powerful message about his lived experience. We're also going to hear from Yoni and Gideon Belete, Jews of Ethiopian descent from Toronto, who share their views on race and racism. But we start our journey in Atlantic Canada with a young Jewish leader I really admire and who I'm lucky enough to call friend. Naomi Rosenfeld is Executive Director of the Atlantic Jewish Council. In addition to sharing a heartfelt message for her fellow Jews across Canada, she tells us about the significant challenges of serving a small population across a huge chunk of Canadian geography during the COVID-19 crisis.
When this crisis began, what we really saw was because of the demographics of our community. We're small, we're spread out, and we have a large number of seniors and other people who are vulnerable. So we actually started getting, really right from the beginning, we started getting increased numbers of calls for help. It was really the heart and the power of our volunteers that we were able to react to this crisis and help those in need in our community. What I'd like to say to my volunteers, both here in the Jewish community in Atlantic Canada and the volunteers that we're seeing an outpouring of from all across the country, thank you. You are the reason that we have a Jewish community that we are so proud of, whether we're in Halifax or Victoria or anywhere in between. So thank you to everyone who has stepped up and helped in this time. Like many communities across the country, we were forced to close our summer camps for the 2020 season. Our camps are a lifeline to our Jewish communities, to our youth, to engage with Jewish identity, to be surrounded by Jewish friends. And this closing of our summer season is going to take a big toll on us. On behalf of the entire Atlantic Canadian Jewish community, I want to thank our fellow Jews from across the country. The fact that we can be there for one another in these times of crises is so important, and I want to thank each and every Jew across the country. The best thing that you can do right now is to help, to offer to volunteer some of your time. What we need more than dollars right now in Atlantic Canada is people's time to go get groceries, time to make a few phone calls. We rely on volunteers now more than ever.
Naomi began her journey to become an impressive Jewish leader at Camp Kadima, another example of why Jewish summer camps are so important to Jewish continuity. Thank you, Naomi. CIJA's mission is to protect the quality of Jewish life in Canada through advocacy. Here's a snapshot of what your advocacy agent has been up to since last week's show. We consulted with more than 150 synagogue leaders across Ontario in advance of making a formal submission to government on safely reopening synagogues. We continued our advocacy on behalf of the charitable sector during the COVID-19 crisis, including talking to Finance Canada this week about further enhancements to the Emergency Wage Subsidy Program. CIJA also engaged with the federal government on Canada-Israel bilateral relations. And for some time, one of our top priorities has been combating online hate. We've been engaging policymakers, including making extensive representations to the Justice Committee. Part of our work on online hate includes monitoring the online world. And this week, we challenged a statement made by the president of the Delta Hospice Board, who compared medical assistance in dying to the Holocaust. We contacted the board, engaged the president. To her credit, she apologized and will be visiting the Vancouver Holocaust Center to learn a little bit more about why it is so ill-advised to draw erroneous comparisons to the Shoah to make a political point. And finally, please read this op-ed in the Star, which outlines 4 concrete proposals that we and our co-authors are adding to the policy discussion on racism. Now for an Ethiopian Jewish perspective on race and racism in Canada and abroad, I'm pleased to present Yoni and Gideon Belete from
2 weeks ago, the world watched as George Floyd, an unarmed black man, was murdered under the knee of a police officer in Minneapolis. While Gideon and I watched the initial clip in horror, we were not shocked. At an early age, we learned that police brutality and anti-black racism exists here in Canada, the United States, and Israel. Here's the root of the problem. For far too long, black lives have been deemed lesser than and thus expendable. To not understand this gross historical truth is to not understand the origins of black pain and outrage.
The reality is, being black has a strong bearing on how you're treated, viewed, and perceived. Stereotypes rooted in hostility and inferiority have long been tethered to black skin and has resulted in discrimination. In George Floyd's case, it resulted in his death. These lived truths are also shared by Ethiopian Israelis in Israel, who recently protested the murder of an 18-year-old Solomon Teka after he was shot and killed by an off-duty police officer in the Haifa suburb. While we closely follow the grievances of our community in Israel, we also face another kind of discrimination here in the Toronto Jewish community.
Being an Ethiopian Jew in a predominantly Ashkenazi community has its challenges. While growing up, being the only black person in my classroom and friend group left me feeling isolated at times, but it also allowed me to be a voice on Ethiopian Jewry when our chapter in Jewish history was missing from the textbooks.
Despite this, Jonathan and I remain optimistic that through education and inclusion, we can work to build a more tolerant community and world.
Fighting systemic racism requires a willingness to listen, a desire to learn, and a lifelong commitment to action. It's about time we get started.
Powerful. The first step is listening. You can hear more perspectives from Jews of color in our listening series, links in the show notes below. This series features black thought leaders in civil society, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, and it includes a video from Reverend Anthony Bailey. After watching the video on Facebook, a viewer wrote to tell me how touched they were that in such a personal and powerful message, and at a time when global consciousness is on anti-black racism, that Reverend Bailey would take the time and effort to honor the Jewish tradition. We're going to play a short clip so you can see what that viewer means, but I do suggest that you go to our website and watch the full video. It's very, very powerful.
I ask that you would pay attention to what is happening in the pleas of racialized black people and what needs to happen in order for us to come together. May I close with a Hebrew blessing that I enjoy from your tradition. Hashem desires that we asot mishpat, ve'chabat chesed, ve'chadehnehach, lechetim, elo lechecha. We indeed need to come together with mercy, justice, and love. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Bailey, for your leadership and for your friendship. Housekeeping. Books. Big thanks to those who wrote in about our interview with Einat Wilf. Her new book, The War of Return, is on its way to 10 of you. Special shout out to Alana in Ottawa. I was delighted, Alana, to see your name in our inbox, and I truly hope that you and your family are well at this time. I want to say a big thank you to Michael Regenstreif at the Ottawa Jewish Bulletin, a newspaper that has been faithfully serving the Ottawa community since 1937, and to Mike Cohen at the Suburban in Montreal, which is Quebec's largest circulation English language weekly. Both of them covered us and the show in articles this week, and for that we're very grateful. Lumière, caméra, action! Bonne nouvelle pour les amateurs du cinéma. La 15e édition du Festival du cinéma israélien de Montréal se tiendra en ligne du 10 à 21 juin. Ne manquez pas cet rendez-vous. Next week, we'll have the pleasure of speaking with festival co-chairs Gérard and Chantal Buzaglo. And in the meantime, be sure to check out their website, which is fcim.ca for more details. À la semaine prochaine. We started the show in Atlantic, Canada. We're going to end it in Vancouver, which seems fitting, with words of wisdom from Rabbi Jonathan Infeld of Beth Israel, who's also co-chair of the Canadian Rabbinic Caucus. But because the world feels like it needs more wisdom this week, we're also pleased to feature Rabbi Elyse Goldstein at City Shul, a Jewish heart in the heart of Toronto. Rabbi Elyse, I believe, is Canada's first female rabbi. See you next week.
Hello everyone. This week's Parsha, Baha'alotecha, begins with the instructions to Aaron to, quote, raise up the lamps. And Rashi, the medieval commentator, wants to know, why is the word raise up here used instead of the more common light or kindle? And he teaches us something I think is very relevant and inspirational for us for this week. He says that Aaron is to light the lights, quote, until they rise up by themselves. Now we know that light is the symbol of both the divine and the human soul in Judaism. And that's our task in this time of darkness then, to raise up the lamps that we kindle for everyone, not just for ourselves. That is, to be the light, to spread the light, and to raise the light up so that it rises again on its own. We can do it together. Shabbat Shalom.
The late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that racism is an eye disease. Now is time to cure the disease. And now is the time to embrace with love those who are victims of hatred and racism. The Torah taught us and reminds us again and again that we were slaves in Egypt, and we must never forget that we were freed by God. Please, let us help the oppressed.
A glass of milk rapidly loses its freshness if poured between two couch cushions. That is science.
I don't think that's science, Dad.
Hey, pipe down. I pay you to fix the blinking light on our VCR and to explain to me how the internet works, not to weigh in on important adult issues.
10-4.
Oh, hey, Bobby. Getting away from the family?